They say betrayal in the workplace doesn't come with blood or bruises. It comes with a handshake, a soft tone, and a folder that ends your livelihood. He smiled when he fired me. And I smiled back because 5 minutes later, I torched the one thing he'd spent years working toward. Before we dive in, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Drop a comment below. I read everyone. I arrived early. My name's Daniel Reed. I'm 43, divorced, no kids, and up until this morning, I was a senior operations analyst at a mid-sized firm I gave 17 years of my life to. 17 years of early mornings, late nights, and bending over backward to make other people look good. I don't have a fancy degree or a silver tongue. What I have is experience and the patience to keep things running while egos float around like balloons. I never played the office politics game, not because I was noble, but because I knew how to make myself too useful to fire. Or so I thought. My boss, Todd Halverson, had different ideas. Picture the kind of guy who smiles with his teeth, not his eyes. Tall, gelled hair, pressed shirts that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. He joined our department 3 years ago, all charm and buzzwords. The type who could give a 20-minute presentation that said nothing and still get a round of applause. At first, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Then I ended up rewriting his reports, building his budgets, even writing parts of his speeches. He climbed, I stayed in the background, fine by me. I figured if I kept being the guy who delivered, I'd be protected when cuts came. And the cuts did come. Quiet at first, an assistant here, a coordinator there, then whole teams were gone overnight. I'd just finished leading a cost-saving project that had cut over $1 million in overhead without layoffs. Todd was eager to include that win in his promotion file. He was gunning for executive director, and I was the one finalizing the paperwork that would seal it. Everything was in line. Performance reviews, letters of recommendation, even the quarterly numbers I'd massaged to make him look like a budget whisperer. At 9:58 a.m. today, my calendar pinged with an unexpected meeting invite. Small conference room. No subject. My stomach dropped. I'd seen this play before. I walked in and found Todd already seated, his hands folded, a woman from HR by his side. She had a manila folder and a blank expression, like she'd given this speech 100 times. Todd didn't even look at me when she started talking. Words like realignment and strategic headcount reduction floated through the air like secondhand smoke. It was over in 4 minutes. At exactly 10 a.m., I was unemployed. But someone had been careless. My login still worked. My email, my file access, even the promotion portal. At 10:05 a.m., I sat down one last time at my desk, opened Todd's application, hit withdraw. The screen blinked. "Are you sure?" it asked. I clicked yes. Not badavde. There was no dramatic music, no flashing red alert when I clicked the button. Just a soft little confirmation successful message and the quiet hum of the office AC. I stared at the screen for a second, half expecting someone to appear behind me and drag me out by the collar. But nothing happened. No one noticed. People were still tapping at their keyboards, laughing in hushed tones near the kitchenette. I stood up slowly, grabbed the small cardboard box I always kept tucked under my desk, just in case, and started placing things inside. A couple framed photos, a coffee mug my niece had painted for me, and a legal pad full of notes for meetings I'd never attend. I didn't rush. There's something freeing about having nothing left to lose. I didn't do it out of spite, at least not entirely. I did it because of what it said about him. About Todd, the man who had smiled at my wedding photo one day and signed my termination the next. He knew how close I was to finishing his promotion file. Knew it because he'd been micromanaging me for weeks, checking in with fake friendly texts like, "Hey Dan, any word from HR yet?" He was impatient, ready to vault into that corner office with the glass walls and bigger title. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I was the last checkpoint. My sign-off was required before it went to executive review. One click. No questions asked. I could have let it go through. Could have been the bigger man. But why? You work somewhere that long, you start to think loyalty counts for something. I'd mentored new hires, solved crises on holidays, even covered for my boss when he flew out early to catch games or anniversaries. None of that mattered. I wasn't laid off for performance. I was cut because Todd saw an opportunity to make himself look decisive, efficient. That's the part that got to me. Not the job loss, not the money. The erasure. Like 17 years could be wiped clean with a signature and a buzzword. I didn't march back into his office and throw a scene. That's not who I am. I just left the building quietly, box in hand, past the security guard who gave me a sympathetic nod, but didn't ask questions. Outside, the sun was blinding. It always is when you come out of a building where your life used to be. I sat in my car for a long time, fingers drumming the wheel, heart strangely calm. Not angry, not even sad. Just settled. I had no plan, no backup gig lined up. But for the first time in years, I wasn't beholden to anyone. And neither was Todd, because now he'd have to explain why his promotion was pulled at the last minute, why the final approver never gave the green light. Maybe he'd try to blame me, say I sabotaged it. Maybe he'd even believe that. But the truth was, all I did was nothing. I didn't approve. I didn't support. I simply stepped out of the way and let his own ambition eat him alive. The fallout didn't come immediately. Corporate machines don't run on emotion. They run on process. I figured it would take a day or two before anyone even noticed the promotion was missing. Todd probably strutted through the office that morning thinking the last checkbox had already been ticked. He probably thought I had clicked submit before they brought me into that little HR ambush. That's the thing about people like him. They assume the world operates in their favor by default. That someone else is always finishing the job for them. When you take that support away, they don't know how to function. I spent the next couple of days in a strange kind of limbo. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. Not my old co-workers, not the guy in IT I used to grab lunch with, not even my sister who called that night when she saw I hadn't logged into our shared family calendar. I just told her work was in flux. That was technically true. I applied for unemployment and started scanning job boards with all the enthusiasm of a man watching wet paint dry. I wasn't ready to jump into something new. I needed time. 17 years is a marriage. Getting fired like that, it felt like being dumped over text. Then, 3 days later, I got the call. Unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. It was Marlene, from HR. The same woman who'd read me my exit script like she was ordering from a drive-through menu. Her voice was different this time. Strained, cautious. Daniel, I know this is a little unusual, but would you be open to speaking with us about your departure? Specifically, about the timing of certain files that were in process when you exited. She didn't say Todd's name, but I didn't need her to. I knew exactly what this was about. I agreed, calmly, and asked for everything in writing. Old habit. She hesitated, probably surprised I didn't cave into a flustered yes, but promised to follow up by email. She did. And when I opened the attached PDF, I almost laughed. It was a formal request asking me to confirm the status of Todd Halverson's promotion submission at the time of my departure. No threats, no accusations, just corporate speak dancing around the fact that they had no idea what had happened. They'd reached the final review stage, and someone up the chain had flagged the file as incomplete. No submission, no green light, no record of approval. I let the email sit for a few hours. Then I typed out a polite, professional response. At the time of my exit, the file had not been submitted. To my knowledge, no final approval was issued. That was all I said. It was all I needed to say. I didn't lie. I didn't volunteer anything extra. I didn't have to. Todd would now have to explain why the one person with final sign-off just happened to be the guy he axed right before it was due. The irony was too neat to ignore. He'd tried to move up by cutting me out, and in doing so, he'd sawed off the very branch he was standing on. Not Badavde. I never heard directly from Todd. Not a text, not an email, not even a cold LinkedIn message pretending to be casual. That's how I knew things were getting bad on his end. Todd only reached out to people when he needed something, or when he needed to spin a story. And right now, his story had a hole in it. A big one. He probably assumed I'd vanished quietly, that I'd gone home to lick my wounds, maybe drink too much and rant on Facebook like some bitter ex-employee. But I wasn't angry in that way. I wasn't looking for revenge in flames. I wanted silence. I wanted the vacuum to eat him alive. And it was working. From what I could gather through the grapevine, and yes, the corporate grapevine is real, even if everyone pretends it isn't, Todd's promotion had stalled. Not rejected. Just stalled. Hung up in executive review, which in our world is usually just code for someone smelled smoke and now legal has to sniff every corner. That kind of delay? That's career cancer for a guy like Todd. The higher up you climb, the more your ascent depends on timing. You have to hit your numbers, ride your wins, and move fast before someone else catches up or your momentum fades. If you stall too long, people start to ask questions. Why him? Why now? Who signed off on this? Without my approval, there was no clean answer. No final endorsement from the guy who knew the numbers best. Even worse, my exit raised eyebrows. On paper, I was a high-performing, long-tenured employee with multiple internal awards. I'd never been written up, never missed a deadline, never taken more than 5 sick days in a year. And yet I was laid off by the very person whose promotion rested on my signature. Todd could try to spin that as coincidence, but anyone who's spent more than 10 minutes in a boardroom knows better. Optics matter. And this? This looked bad. I started getting little messages from people I hadn't heard from in a while. Old colleagues, former managers, even a few folks I didn't know well, but who must have remembered me from some meeting or project. They were all checking in, lightly probing. Hey, just saw some news. How are you holding up? Or, heard there's been some shake-up, crazy times, huh? No one said it outright, but the subtext was clear. Word was getting around. People were wondering what had really happened between me and Todd. And the best part? I didn't have to say a word. The vacuum spoke for me. It was like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. Todd had built his entire image on being smooth, in control, always a step ahead. But now he was cornered by the very thing he underestimated. Me. Not because I was vindictive, but because I'd been essential. Invisible, maybe, but essential. And when he removed me, he thought he was trimming fat. What he didn't realize was, I'd been holding up the foundation. A week after HR's email, I got a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Robert Linwood, a senior VP I used to work under back when the company was half its current size and twice as sane. Robert was the old-school type, Harvard MBA, sharp mind, sharper suits, but with just enough humility to listen when someone like me flagged an issue. He'd retired from day-to-day operations but still sat on the executive advisory board. When his name popped up in my inbox, I thought it was a mistake. But it wasn't. The subject line was simple. Quick call? I gave him 15 minutes. He took 50. He asked how I was doing, really doing. Not in that polite HR way, but in the way someone does when they've been around long enough to know what losing a job at 43 feels like. Then he asked what happened with Todd's promotion. Not directly, of course. He framed it around workflow concerns and gaps in procedural documentation, but I could tell he already knew, or at least suspected. So I told him the truth. Not the petty version, not the revenge fantasy, just the plain facts. I told him I was let go minutes before I could finalize Todd's file. I told him I didn't sabotage anything. I just didn't push it through, I left it incomplete. Robert didn't react for a long time. Then he let out this small, dry chuckle, like he'd seen this movie before. "That man's been gunning for my seat since he got here," he said, more to himself than to me. He thought he could shortcut it. He doesn't realize that up here reputation travels faster than performance. He thanked me for the honesty, said he'd keep in touch, and hung up. I didn't know what would come of it. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But it felt like closure. Not the legal kind, the emotional kind. Like someone, somewhere, had finally put 2 and 2 together. A few days later, I got a text from my friend Malik, who still worked in finance. Just 2 words. "It's done." I called him. He laughed before even saying hello. "Your boy Todd?" Promotion got iced. Officially. No reason given, just a quiet note from upstairs that they're reconsidering leadership alignment. He's still got his job for now, but he's radioactive. Nobody wants to touch him. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I asked the only question I really cared about. "Did he figure out it was me?" Malik hesitated. "He suspects, yeah. But there's no proof. And even if there was, he can't say a damn thing without making himself look worse." That night, I slept harder than I had in months. Not because I ruined someone. I didn't. Todd still had his title, his paycheck, his glass-walled office. I just reminded him, and maybe a few others, what happens when you forget who helped you climb. I wasn't bitter anymore. I didn't feel small. I felt precise, like a missing puzzle piece that made the whole picture fall apart when it was quietly taken away. A month later, I started consulting. Quietly at first. A few calls with former vendors, then a short-term contract helping a mid-sized firm untangle a mess of overlapping logistics systems. Nothing flashy, just the kind of work I'd done for years, only now I was billing by the hour, setting my own terms. It didn't take long before word spread that I was available. Turns out, when you've been the guy behind the curtain for long enough, people remember you. The ones who mattered, anyway. No big LinkedIn post. No leaving to pursue new opportunities. Fluff. I just moved on. Todd stayed where he was, from what I heard. Still showing up, still trying to smile his way through the awkward glances. But his halo was gone. Promotions dried up. The projects he led didn't hit the mark without someone quietly steering behind the scenes. Maybe he started to understand what he'd lost. Maybe not. Some people never do. That was the beauty of it, really. I didn't destroy him. I didn't need to. I just reminded the system that it still mattered who did the real work. I've thought about that morning more than once, about the look on his face when he read from the HR script like it wasn't personal, about how easy it would have been to just hit submit, collect my severance, and fade away. But that would have meant leaving things clean for him. And Todd didn't deserve clean. He deserved exactly what he got. A mirrored version of what he tried to do to me. Professional erasure. Except mine came with grace, his came with noise. Some people will read this and say I was petty, maybe, but I wasn't reckless. I didn't scream, didn't sue, didn't torch the building on my way out. I let the system trip over its own arrogance. That's not revenge. That's balance. There's a difference. Now I wake up without an alarm clock. I take on projects I believe in. I make less money, sure, but I sleep better. I'm not waiting for the other shoe to drop. I already lived through the drop, and I learned something valuable in the process. You don't always have to swing to hit back. Sometimes all it takes is walking away at the right moment and letting gravity do the rest. Because at 10 a.m., he fired me. And at 10:05, I reminded him who had made him worth promoting in the first place,